Well, it was a pretty normal day. My wife and I both got home from work, and we began going through our typical routine, which is when you've got a couple of kids, which is we're going through diaper bags, and we're trying to catch up with each other about how our days had gone. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that my wife's eyes were red, and it was clear that she had been crying. And so the moments that followed this still baffle my mind, because what happened next was my children, a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old at the time, began to contently play together on the living room floor, which never happens. And all of a sudden, my wife and I were given this rare opportunity to sit at the dining room table and to have an adult conversation. And so as we sat down, I just simply asked, "So what's up?" And as tears began to well in her eyes, she told me that at work that day, a friend and a coworker had asked a very simple question. She asked how our marriage was doing. And as the tears began to come down her eyes and down her cheeks, she said, "Robbie, I told her that I feel like I don't even know you anymore." Whew, yeah, that air that just left the room. That's how I felt that day as well. And I remember just sitting here and going, how did we get here? And what conversation are we about to have next? And we've all been here, right? Or some version of right here, where our lives are like going this direction, then all of a sudden an e-brake gets pulled and it's like, Arr! We're going a different direction. It's a turning point. Except in these big catalytic turns, we don't know exactly what direction we're going in next. And so I remember just sitting there and just marinating in my failing marriage and going, how did we get here? 7 years into marriage, 2 kids. I was, 3 careers, 5 jobs in already as a millennial, right on pace. And I'm sitting there going, okay, what do we do next? Like, I have to say something. And I'm so grateful that in our engagement, during our engagement, we had read a book called The 5 Love Languages. And so in that moment, I had the next right thing I could do was like word vomit some version of like, how's our love languages? It was really awkward. And she gracefully accepted that little start to conversation, and we began to talk. And I didn't have a whole lot of next steps, but I had one. And out of that, I learned I needed to just stop. I needed to stop a lot of things that I was doing because she needed more quality time. And so the next day, that's what I did. I pulled a break on all of the projects that I was working on. I stepped down from boards and leadership positions that I was on. I called and canceled speaking engagements that I had just so that I could be home more. Except when I was home in those coming days, I remember being on the living room floor with my kids, like physically present, but not actually there. Do you know what I mean? You're right there looking at them and going, I know I'm supposed to be here, but my mind is someplace else, because when we're having one of these catalytic turning point moments, all of us do the same thing. We all ask a lot of really big questions. Things like, who am I? What am I doing with my life? How did we get here? What am I supposed to do next? Eventually, I started landing on the question of, what is my purpose? And then eventually I landed squarely on, what is my calling? I just kept asking that. What is my calling? Now, I'm grateful that she pulled an e-brake like this. Like, babe, seriously, thank you for pulling an e-brake. Because what happened next changed my life and has gone on to hopefully change the lives of a lot of other people. Over the next 2.5 years, I just took a deep dive, y'all. Like a deep dive into figuring out, who am I? I read a lot of books. I went to conferences, I leaned into my mentors, and there were some people like Bob Goff and Shauna Niequist and Donald Miller, whose words gave me permission to figure out who I actually was and to start bringing that out into the world, which led me from this table over here to this table, which literally this morning I stole from the coffee hound next door. Because this conversation has now led me into hundreds of conversations over the last 3 or 4 years, and some of you have seen me there, at this table, with hundreds of community members from right here in TEDxNormal who are asking the same questions of, who am I? What am I doing with my life? What's the point? And I always start in the same spot and try and just figure out, where are you coming to this conversation from? And so the best way I can kind of describe talking about calling, talking about purpose, is this image of a tachometer. Now, I'm not a car guy, so I had to literally look this up. So the tachometer is this device that measures the amount of RPMs, rotations per minute, on your vehicle. And it's there because the designers, the creators, the engineers of each vehicle has designed a sweet spot, okay? A sweet spot, this spot that the engine is tuned for optimal long-term sustainable use. And it's usually somewhere around 2,000 to 3,500 RPM. And in our lives, we also have a sweet spot. We have a spot where we are best wired to live our lives out of, but most of us don't know what that is. In fact, there's some stats here. There's a study called the State of the American Workforce that the Gallup organization put out. And they said 80% of Americans confess that they hate their jobs. 80%. Woo, winning, right? Here's the scary part. A few pages later, it goes on to say, when asked, what is the biggest predictor of happiness? A good job. Over 80% of people said having a good job equals happiness. And yet, if 80% of the people hate their jobs, you all do the math. I got a D in algebra. What do you think? Is it working? No, and so most people don't know where their sweet spot is, and if they happen to be in it, and that 20% of people who might be in their sweet spot, they don't know how they got there. They don't even really know where they are, and they don't know how to stay there. And so I was here. I was redlining it. And I call this crowbarring it because when you're redlining it for too long, it's great for passing vehicles on the interstate. But it is not, your vehicle is not wired for long-term use there. And so when you're crowbarring it, that means you want to just keep moving things forward. You fill your life with busyness, keep doing more and more and more, achieving, striving, getting that next job, that next relationship, that next house, whatever it is, and we redline it. Eventually we might crash. Our engine might just totally blow up. And that's where I was. Thankfully, she pulled that e-brake. And crowbarring it because when you're redlining it, there's doors that you want to open up next. And if they're not already open for you, you're going to go get a crowbar out of the closet and you're going to open that door one way or another. Now, I don't know if you've ever used a crowbar to enter a door before, but typically, how does the person on the other side of the door really feel about you? Are they like, woo, thanks for coming, glad you're here? No, most of the time they're not thrilled that you just came in that way. And if you walk through that doorway, you might get impaled with some splinters on your side. You're dripping some blood. And typically, you're just wanting to get to the next door to bust open. You leave a trail of mess behind that someone else has to clean up. That's redlining it. Y'all, that's not a sustainable way to live. And we know this, but our culture keeps promoting this. To do more, to do more, to do more. If you crash and burn enough times, eventually you get over here. And I call this treadmilling it. This is living in the lower registers of our potential. And again, our engine is wired to kind of treadmill it every once in a while, but we're supposed to be in that sweet spot. And there's something about just getting up, doing the same thing every day, wash, rinse, repeat, that we're not wired for that as human beings. We are wired for growth, for movement, for evolution, for moving forward. And it's like the highlight of your day when you're stuck treadmilling it is getting to the end of the day and plopping down on your couch, pulling up the DVR, getting Netflix up and just eating Cheetos and then what's left on your fingers after you eat Cheetos, right? That's the highlight, woo! But eventually all of us, we can't stay there. It's like a switch flips and we've got to do something different. And this is where midlife crises usually happen. This is where really dumb decisions usually start to happen. And people do some things with some really negative consequences that come into their career, their family, their relationships. And so it's because they don't know what their sweet spot is. They just know they need to hit the gas again. So I come here and I sit here, and like I said, with a bunch of folks over the last few years, and I help them do this. This is a puzzle. Now, if you came in here, some of you might have gotten a puzzle piece. If you wouldn't mind getting that out and holding it in your hand right now, we'll get to that in a second. As I talk about this, I come here, I sit down, and I begin by, like we all do with a puzzle, we open it up, and what do? Yeah, we dump out the pieces. And that's really where it starts for me. I call this the clarity and calling process. So it starts by dumping out the pieces, and what do? You start flipping them over, right? And so I literally start helping people flip over the pieces of their life. And looking back over the history of their life and identifying what were those moments that made you feel alive, like where your heart's beating out of your chest, those high moments. What were those? Let's lean into those. And then flip over some more. Oh man, what were some of those lows? Those lows that shaped you, that created greater empathy for other people, that created some boundaries for you to kind of navigate your life. And when you do that and you flip over all the pieces, you start to see there's some edge pieces, right? You see some colors and some themes start to jump out. And once you get some of those themes, I then go to the next step, which is to find their ability. And so that's like picking up each piece and looking at it and going, okay, what are your true strengths and your true weaknesses? Like your true ones. Because if 80% of people say they hate their jobs, well, that means those same 80% of people took that job. Right? Like, at some point in time, you sat across to the table from someone who was interviewing you, you said, yeah, I'm good at this. I should do this. You should pay me. And then we're mad later when it's like, it's all their fault. It's like, no. One of my favorite first century writers said, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Like, y'all are reaping what you're sowing to some extent. When you tell people that you're something that you're actually not, and then you get mad when they hold you to it, that's on you. That's on us. Don't mock God. We reap what we sow. And so if we can start to own our real strengths and our real weaknesses and just put those out there, share those with people, let them see you in a true economy of who you actually are, then we can begin to look out. And when you look out, that's like taking your puzzle box, right? Flipping it up and seeing the big picture. The big picture, which I call your affinity. Timothy Keller defines it as the need in the world that you are best suited to meet. Could you answer that question right now? Hey, what's the need in the world you're best suited to meet? No? Okay. Most of us can't. But if we look back over our stories and we look at our actual strengths and weaknesses, then we can begin to look out and go, man, what's that gap in the marketplace that when I step into it, I come alive? Or what's that thing that breaks my heart that I have to be a part of solving that problem? Y'all, when you do that, all of a sudden I see these people on the other side of the table just go, oh, there it is. And then I get to help them with the next step, which is looking forward and really taking advantage of the opportunity they have each day to do the next right thing. I help them by looking out 10 years and going, what do you want to be true 10 years from now? For your life, your relationships, your career, your finances. What do you want? Y'all, if you were to be asked right now, what is it that you want? Most of us would start with some real small bean stuff like a house, a car, or whatever. And once you get past that list and you get down to the real meaningful stuff, most of us struggle to really say what it is we want. Well, start by looking out 10 years and then start by looking out next year. What do you want to be true this time next year? And what are you going to do about it? Helping people go, I want that to be true. Okay, well, let's start working towards that. What are you going to do to make that happen? You reap what you sow. And then I go through this whole process, and eventually we get to the end of it, and people just sit there like, thank you, like grateful and full-hearted. But then they just like stay there and don't say anything for a little bit. And I'm like, okay, I see what you need. Just like I had some mentors who were here in this room today who gave me permission to do the next thing, I also have to do that. And so I've got this journal that I had printed up at the copy shop here in town. And in the back of it, because I used to be a school principal, I have hall passes printed up. I'm almost out of them. And I literally will write people's names down, and I'll write a little bullet point from each of these 4 steps. And then I'll say, if you need permission to do what you know you now need to do, you've got it. Like I used to be a principal. Go. And I'll write that down, and some of you may have seen me do this at the Hound with this kid on the other side of the table, like, thanks, And I write, and I sign it. And so I got to ask, if you're here in this room today or if you're watching online, if you're stuck and you're waiting for someone to give you permission to hit the gas towards a more meaningful direction, I give you permission. If you're here in this room, and you're redlining it and you're like, I'm about to crash, and you're waiting for someone to give you permission to pull an e-brake, I'm giving you permission. Pull an e-brake. Figure out who you actually are. I am so grateful that she pulled that e-brake. And I'm so grateful that these people trust a schmuck like me to come alongside them and help them figure out who they actually are. Because if you take your puzzle piece right now, those of you who are in the room, and you just think about this. If each of us could put together the puzzle that is our lives and find our true calling, then we can take it and it makes our own puzzle piece that we can take out into the world each day. And just imagine if enough of us knew who we actually were and we brought that into the world each day up next to other people and we could start putting these pieces together, what kind of a world could we create? What kind of picture could we begin to see coming into reality? You've got my permission. Go. Live a life worthy of the calling that you have received. Thank you.